a very good morning to everybody who's made time out to be here today. It is indeed a privilege for me to sit here and moderate on what is a very important topic: rule of law and accountability, the consequences of no consequences. This particular panel, we're putting law firms under the spotlight, and I am joined by these very esteemed speakers. And with the time that we have, what we're looking to do is to open up the discussion and possibly identify some solutions for us to chew on and ultimately implement. And at the end of the session, we will have a Q&A where we will hopefully take some questions. So without further ado, I want us to dive in, and I'm directing the very first question to Ose. I got your name right, correct? And as I said, it is rule of law. We're putting law firms under the spotlight. I've been given a script here, and I'm going to read it. So the questions are: how can we hold the legal profession accountable for its actions and inactions regarding enforcing or implementing safety guidelines and policies in the workplace for professionals? That's question one. The second question: what would an appropriate proportional consequence look like?
Good morning, everyone. It is indeed a pleasure to be here today. I think it's important that we're having this conversation. And even more important, if you look at the IBA research that came out in 2019 and the pandemic, even before the corona pandemic that's hitting the legal practice, it's actually a tsunami. The point is, I think, how we can hold law firms accountable. We have to call out the legal practice. We really need to call out the legal practice because for a very long time, the legal practice has failed to self-regulate. And if you fail to self-regulate, chances are someone from the outside will regulate you or you implode. And so, for the sake of society, we actually owe it a duty as every individual in this room, and both lawyers, to call out the legal profession to live up to its expectations. So we cannot be defending the rights of people outside, and where we trample on the rights of those that work for us. And to be fair, the current administration has taken a step in the right direction by bringing in the sexual harassment policy. That, for me, that is just one aspect of the holistic conversation. What about bullying that goes on in law firms? What about victimization? What about poor remuneration? So we're looking at a safe work environment. You can't have a safe work environment without talking about the decent work agenda, which happens to be one of the Sustainable Development Goals. So safety, decent work, all come together to create a violent-free workspace. So we have triggers of violence in the office. It could be poor remuneration that is triggering violence towards women. It could be the bullying that someone has culturally taken over a couple of years that's actually driving it. So it's a more holistic conversation that we should be having. And for me, one of the first things we've done, and I agree, is that the policy has been brought up. But the problem, again, with Nigerian policy and legislation is implementation. And so I'm quite happy that the MB has set up an implementation committee. I'm part of that implementation committee. And what it then means is that we are going to look at that policy and interrogate it, implement it transparently, so that people can actually hold us accountable to the standards we've set. And so it's very important that we all key into this and understand that if you do not hold the law practice or the law profession accountable and ask them questions, they probably will not ask themselves these questions. So it's very important that we look at that from that point of view. And for me, I know someone mentioned that there might be no need to amend the RPC and the LPA. I think it's critical. Because if you look at the act that actually governs employment in Nigeria, it's over 41 years old, just like every other of those legislations. So it's important that we begin to look at amending those legislations to bring it in line with modern reality. So for me, implementation, amendment, and calling out the bar are the key takeaways for me.
Very nicely put. Thank you very much. And Onikepo, I'm going to bring the question back to you, still with law firms under the spotlight. And law firms are viewed as very hierarchical places. I'm not sure I totally agree, but that's a conversation for another day. And the question is this: how can power be more evenly distributed in the legal profession?
I don't know. I don't know how power can be more, maybe distributed in what sense? In the sense of sex? Because if you look at a country like Rwanda, they actually pass laws for affirmative action. So maybe more women, I don't know. But, in terms of here in Nigeria, it seems as if women are even the worst enemies of women. That you probably find more protection or whatever it is, the man will speak up for you. But I think maybe one of the first steps is to have some kind of affirmative action. So maybe some kind of policy that increases the participation of women. As I was reading my profile that you had on me, and where you said I was shortlisted for the SAN. And, I was told that as deliberations were going on, they said, they have 72, 130 of us were shortlisted, meaning that we've all qualified. So it could be any one of us, 130. And, at the end of the day, they picked 72 candidates. And out of 72 candidates, only 2 women. But on the committee, there are several women on the LPPC. And when the matter came up, only 2 women, they just, they didn't really bother about it or whatever. It was the UN Deputy Secretary General, when we were discussing, she was outraged that, there were 4 of us women shortlisted, 2 of us dropped, 2 of us taken. But there were women, and I was surprised. They didn't, I don't even know whether, there's something about the mindset of our society. Number 1, sexual harassment is no big deal. Number 2, there's no accountability. If you look at the case of Harvey Weinstein, for instance, where, of course, sexual harassment, it shows it occurs everywhere. But there's accountability in their own society. Yes, I was even shocked at the caliber of actresses that he had actually harassed that had kept quiet and only started coming out of the woodwork after, he was arrested and all that. But the issue is that there's accountability. He's in jail right now. Here, there's no accountability. You will be victimized if you even go and report. Leonard Silkiemi was saying that, if something happens, you go and report to the seniors in your, they'll just sack you. So there needs to be, more than any law, yes, there's really, the laws against sexual harassment are more for the university, the Sexual Harassment in Tertiary Educational Institution Act 2016, aka Sexual Harassment Act. That is more for the for university. But so yes, we can enact laws for it in the workplace. But beyond that, we have so many laws, and they're not enforced, and there's no accountability. You can maneuver your way out of it. The other day, I was at the MBA conference, and I was quite shocked. A friend of mine, older friend of mine, his son came in with this lady. So he was saying to me, he said, this is my son, and that's his wife, and she's his conference material. Conference material. He was saying that the woman with his son, his wife, is the conference material. So where you say that, when senior lawyers are going for conference and then they book one room and take their juniors along. So the moment he said that, in my mind, I was shocked. I said, I hope this man is not one of those people that does that kind of thing. So it's not a big deal. And then also women ourselves, now we want to progress, and we want to progress anyhow. So, we ourselves are part of that culture. You know what I mean? If they're going to post me to Abuja instead of posting me to Kutu Wenji, you know what I mean? Why not? It doesn't have a meter. You know what I mean? Why not? Why not play ball? You know, you have people in university, they are lazy, they don't want to study. And so they are like, you know, why not have an affair with the professor and get an A instead of having to study? In our own day, we failed land law twice. We just managed to pass Professor Tuama. I've never heard of going to beg when you fail. It didn't happen in our time. We were having sleepless nights thinking, are we going to graduate or not? Because if we don't pass this land law the third time, well, that's another year. You know, so begging, you know, so also you see that society itself has degenerated. There's a theory that says that society, it oscillates up and down. When it's up, it's at the top moral and top everything. And then it starts to come down.
Sorry, I'm going to put you on pause for that because of the time. It's counting down, and we have a couple of other things that we want to touch on. So we're going to come back on that, because essentially what you're talking about is transformation. Yeah. So Dayo, a very brave man, the only non-lawyer on this panel, and a social and international development expert. It is a pleasure. And I'm going to ask you this question. Do you agree with the observations of a lot of Nigerians that the questionable behavior of a lot of political leaders, as well as Oga culture, has seeped into the legal and private sector? Why must it be addressed, and how? If you can just unpack that in 2 to 3 minutes.
So thank you for the question. It's loaded, but I'll try and unpack it. I thought it was Nkiru's way of getting back at me to have me on this panel. When she visited my office, I explained to her how I weaponized the air conditioner in my office. But I'll try and discharge myself to the best of my abilities. I think the short answer to the question, has that Oga culture seeped into the private sector? The short answer is absolutely. 110%. And we can draw the corollaries. We live in a society where the government is the biggest spender. And I see this as a power relations, really. That what you see at play at the highest level often ends up modeling other behaviors. And so if you find yourself in our society where it is basically possible for you to aspire just because your boss is the Oga, I think everybody will definitely want to follow that. Now, the danger, however, is that what it does is it locks the door against meritocracy. And so everybody basically koto and, I'm trying to remember this word, but basically everybody just drops hard work, drops the need to be productive, and then begins to service the ego of that big Oga. Now, why do we need to deal with this? I think we can look at it from the bigger picture as a country, and then also talk about it as a private sector. In the private sector, I think that for us as a country, if we do not deal with this, essentially what we are dealing with now is likely to continue as a cycle. That is, you find everyone basically believing I can do anything and get away with it because I have a boss somewhere that can protect me. If it's in the private sector, it's basically that productivity is thrown out. It is that the bottom line, which I think is often the most important, significant for the private sector, also get lost. You have a toxic environment where people can no longer function effectively. They can no longer deliver. And I think ultimately is the reputational damage that it brings to such an organization, which is one of the fundamental things that we as a country, we are dealing with now. That anywhere I show or flash my green passport, step aside. That's the first reaction. And I think it's a result of this socialization that has become a part of us. If my Oga is there, I have his backing, everything is possible, and I can escape sanction.
Thank you very much, Dayo. It was a big one to unpack, and what this panel is showing is that there's much more to discuss. 35 minutes is not enough. So, Tola, I'm going to bring the question to you, and I want to shift the conversation a bit, and this is because of the panel that we had before, and it's about young people in the workplace. And the question is this: what does the future workplace hold for young professionals, particularly the younger generation who are unwilling to keep silent in the face of abuse in the workplace?
Thank you very much, Sandra, and congratulations again, Nkiru. This is well curated. I was very surprised when I had all these young people out here and nobody mentioned the Council of Legal Education and the experience that Lolia Etomi had and had to come out and say this is what happened in a lecture hall. Both her parents are lawyers. Her father has his own law firm. Maybe that's why she spoke out. But anyway, maybe it was because she didn't really see a future in law. And what a miss. You know, how much talent is being wasted because our young people do not want to have to face harassment and abuse and so decide to go into other things. Maybe the acting was always her dream. But I think about so many other young people who do not have parents as lawyers, who do not have a father who has a law firm, who do not have an alternative career, having to decide that I'm actually not going to practice law because I don't want to face what is out there. There is what is called the bystander effect, and I want to talk about that. There's no reason why sexual abuse should take place in the workplace, and it is facilitated because so many people who see it stand by the side and do nothing and say nothing. The responsibility is on each and every one of us to call out bad behavior when we see it, to call out sexual harassment when we see it. We can all gather together in the room, but if I ask everybody, have you ever seen a colleague abused, either mentally abused as well, because there's also the mental violence that takes place in law firms particularly, or whether it is physical abuse, in some cases it happens, or whether it's sexual abuse, and what did you do about it? Did you look the other way? Did you say something? I was really encouraged. I was speaking to one of my goddaughters who lives in England, and we were talking about, she just started an internship with PwC, and I was asking about racial abuse and whether things had shifted because of Black Lives Matter. And she said, it's really amusing, Nancy, because she went to a public school, a private school here, and she said, it's really interesting because I know a lot of my friends are racist, but they're not aware of it. But what the interesting shift is they're the ones now calling each other out on their racial behavior, on the comments they make that are insensitive. And we have to get to that point where we are the ones, the bystanders are the ones who are empowering the victim to call out, and not be silent, but to call out bad behavior. The men, we talk about he for she's and the role they have to play. But what about us who are just the bystanders? What are we doing about it? And I'm really encouraged because the young people have an outlet. They have social media. And I think that they are less likely to be quiet. We have the Me Too movement, and they're less likely to be quiet, but we have to come alongside them when they speak out. I'm also encouraged because the National Industrial Court is beginning to say, well, okay, these are the laws we have. I remember the Microsoft case where the victim took Microsoft Nigeria and also Microsoft Corporation to the National Industrial Court and won because she lost her job because she wouldn't give in to her boss's harassment. We need to also, and I'm grateful for those who presided over that case, that they were able to bring decisions in from the United Nations conventions and from the ILO conventions and begin to implement them. A lot of boldness is needed, not just from the young people, but from each and every one of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tola. And I'm just going to, because of the clock, I'm looking at it. I want to start from that end and work our way down to Onikepo. If each of you in 1 minute can tell us what you want to be your final word on this panel today. What do you want the audience to take away in 1 minute each?
I wish I can actually say one word. It's difficult to actually say one thing to take away. There's maybe a paragraph, actually, if you ask me.
Go ahead.
What I would say is this. We need a holistic review of our consequence management system. I don't like consequence. I prefer consequence management, because what consequence management does is to look at every bus stop on that chain of offense and find a way to either punish or reward or make up for someone. So for instance, in Nigeria, for sexual harassment cases or bullying, there's no discretion for injury to personal feelings. So I report sexual harassment, there's an award, right? Or under the VAP, there's a fine. But what happens to the victim post that? Because there's loss of earnings. There's a chance that reputationally that person is damaged and might never find work in that sector, so that person is being de-skilled. What is in place to manage everything on this channel? So that's why I'd rather have consequence management, a holistic one, than have consequence.
Thank you. Dayo.
I would focus on accountability. And I think it is important to stress the fact that Nigeria is where it is for lack of accountability. Companies that fail to make it beyond the first year or 5 years, the first 5 years, often, if you investigate, it is that someone responsible for managing resources, whether financial or monetary or human, has mismanaged, and there's no lack of accountability. So I think that for every one of us, we need to begin to speak accountability. And in fact, we should make the next 10 years, 2 decades of Nigeria, decades of accountability, to make a transition to the transformation that my colleague here mentioned. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Tola?
I would say enabling environments and accountability as well, flowing from that. It's interesting to me that somebody can be accused or even convicted of sexual harassment or rape and leave a job like at Reuters and get another job at Newsweek a few weeks later, or leave the Red Cross and get a job at Save the Children. That should not be. And again, I'm coming back to everyone taking responsibility, not to be silent, but to ensure that they call out sexual harassment and that there are consequences even for the perpetrator. There are consequences. Thank you.
Thank you. Onikepo.
Well, I don't know whether it will help. Like in America, for instance, sexual harassment in some states like New York is a Class A misdemeanor, and you can go to jail for a year just for touching inappropriately and all that. So we can, bring in some legislature and all that. But more importantly, apart from accountability, there has to be a change in our mindset. In Nigeria, the victims become the people that are pursued. So when you report something, you now become the bad person. So accountability, maybe some legislation, but enforcement, a change of mindset. Sexual harassment is not okay, it's not right. But, and some affirmative action.
Thank you all very much. And I think my own final words on this would be that in addition to being accountable, when we see that people are being taken to court for the crimes that they are committing, and it is published in the media, that also serves as a deterrent. And we're beginning to see more and more of that. And I will ask Nkiru to allow us to come back and dive very deeply into this particular topic. Thank you all very much for your time. Thank you for listening.